Hello and welcome to our Sunday evening lesson here at Meridianville Church of Christ. We know we have a lot of our members watching this evening, and we're very thankful for that. We also think we probably have some visitors, and we certainly want to welcome you here and hope that you like what you hear. And if you have any questions, certainly reach out to us, check out our website, and hopefully come join us for service here real soon once we start meeting back together again. We're looking at Hebrews chapter 11, and we're looking at the Hall of Faith chapter, or the roll call of the faithful. Throughout Hebrews 11, it'll take an Old Testament character and it'll say, by faith, Noah did this, or by faith, Abraham did this. And the people that it spotlights are not that surprising. It's kind of the people you would expect. But sometimes the events that they actually choose to spotlight are a little unique, and that's certainly the case this evening. Last week, Brother Tom Brandon talked about Isaac and Jacob and the things they did at the end of their lives in verses 20 and 21. And this evening, we're going to begin in Hebrews chapter 11, beginning with verse 22. That's going to be our sole focus this evening. Throughout Hebrews 11, it's kind of been going chronologically as we've looked throughout Genesis, starting with Abel and various others going forward. Our lesson tonight is going to take us right up to the very end of Genesis. And if you'll join me here, we're going to look at Hebrews chapter 11, beginning with verse 22. It says, by faith, Joseph. Now I'm going to stop right there for a second. If you're familiar with the story of Joseph, you could probably predict some things that are going to be said here about Joseph. You would expect that it's going to talk about being sold into slavery and not giving up on God, or maybe Potiphar's wife, or, not getting revenge on his brothers, things like this. Interpreting dreams. But look what it says here. Pretty surprising. Hebrews 11:22. By faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones. Now, these are two pretty simple ideas here. He's going to talk about the exodus, and he's going to make mention of his bones, saying, whenever you leave here, take my bones with you. Pretty simple ideas. To really understand how this is an example of Joseph's great faith, we need to go back and do a recap of Joseph, a short recap of some of the main story points of exactly what had happened to Joseph up until that point. So we'll do that. If you want to turn with me to Genesis chapter 37, we're going to look at some of these examples, and then we'll talk about how we can apply Joseph's faith to us today. Joseph's born a few chapters before 37, but beginning in chapter 37 of Genesis, we start off with Joseph as a 17-year-old boy, and we're told some things about him right off the bat. We're told that he is his father's favorite son because he is the son of his old age. Of course, Jacob is his father. Jacob's going to have 12 sons all in all. Joseph is the 11th in that line. Joseph was the first son of Rachel, which was Jacob's favorite wife. And at this point, Rachel has died, giving birth to Benjamin, and Joseph is Jacob's favorite son. Now, he gives Joseph a coat of many colors, as the Bible often says, and his brothers seem to hate him for it. As we continue through chapter 37, we see that Joseph dreams two different dreams. In both of these dreams, we're not going to get into the specifics just for time's sake. You're probably already familiar with it. But both of these dreams involve Joseph's brothers and his family bowing down to him. After the first dream, his brothers, it says, hate him even more for what they have said. And then he goes on and has a second dream and again relates it to his brothers. Now, these dreams are true. It's not like Joseph's embellishing or making this up, but you would think that maybe a little tact would have gone a long way for Joseph here. Perhaps he should have realized how that first dream was received. Maybe it's just a point of fact of the universe that little brothers are always going to be annoying like this. But whatever the case, Joseph relates these dreams to his brothers, and they do not like him for it. Then we get into verse 12, and Joseph is told by his father to go to Shechem and to visit his brothers that are out pasturing the fields, pasturing the flocks. And so he heads to Shechem. In verse 18 of chapter 37, it says, they saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer." So they see him coming. Brothers not liking brothers, that's not that uncommon. But now they are conspiring to possibly kill him. You're probably familiar. They decide not to kill him. Instead, they throw him in a pit. And as they're sort of deciding what to do with him, a traveling band comes by and they sell their brother into slavery. At the end of chapter 37, we learn that Joseph is now going to be in the house of Potiphar, who is an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. And Joseph's brothers take his coat, they put some blood on it, and they convince his father that Joseph has been killed. And so a very, very dark turn to the story here for Joseph at the age of around 17. We jump to chapter 39, and we see how Joseph's life is going here in Potiphar's house, beginning with verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had, in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. So now you've got this 17-year-old boy. His own brothers have sold him into slavery. Now, you think about what his life was like those first 17 years. Surely he had heard about his great-grandfather Abraham being promised by God to one day have a great nation come of him, this promised land. He's told to leave his home. Surely he's heard about his grandfather Isaac and these large generations of the Lord's people that would come from this line. And he and his 11 brothers, you would expect, Joseph's thinking, that the plan is coming true. On top of that, Joseph's had some dreams that seem to illustrate that he's going to be a pretty important part of that plan. He's his dad's favorite, and now suddenly he's been sold into slavery. You think about a curveball being thrown in your life. I've certainly had some thrown in mine. But being sold into slavery, ripped from everything you know, thrown into a completely brand new culture, that is quite a curveball. Throw into that everything that we've just read. Joseph's young. The Bible says he is good looking in form and appearance. And as soon as he shows up in Potiphar's house, good things start to happen. The Lord is blessing Potiphar's house because of Joseph. It'd be very easy for us to understand that if Joseph would look at this and say, all right, forget the last 17 years. This is a brand new chapter in my life. Things didn't go the way I thought, but now I'm going to take advantage of anything that I can, and I'm going to make a new start here in Egypt. I'm going to, just shun everything that's happened before, including the religion of my great-grandfather Abraham that's been passed down, because that's obviously not working. But that's not what happens. As we go throughout the rest of chapter 39, you're probably familiar. Potiphar's wife sees Joseph, wants to lie with him. Day after day, it seems that she is going to him, trying to ensnare him in this sin. And it'd be very predictable for us to see the exact opposite of what happens in this story. His family, his culture, his God has abandoned him. At least it looks like they have. And you'd think, okay, Joseph, he's just going to take whatever good he can get here. But he doesn't see it that way. Not only does he say that, but if you look at the end of verse 9, after Potiphar tries to ensnare him, a pretty amazing statement is made by Joseph. He says to Potiphar's wife, "How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And that's exactly what it would be. It would be a great wickedness and a sin against God. Joseph does not feel abandoned at this point. He stays faithful to God and what he has been taught about sin. Now, of course, as you know, the story goes on that Potiphar's wife waits till nobody else is in the house. She tries again to get Joseph. She grabs him by the cloak. He flees in the opposite direction, leaving his garment there in her hands. That is always the best response to sin. Faced with sin, we should turn and we should flee. Potiphar's wife tells a lie about him. He ends up in prison. So now he is in prison. He told the truth about the dreams he had when he was a young boy, and that resulted in his brothers selling him into slavery. He's now stayed faithful to God and his master Potiphar, and what good did that get him? Well, now he's in prison. This guy really can't catch a break, for sure. So at the end of 39, we see that Joseph goes to prison. the Lord puts him in charge of the prison. The Lord continues to stay with him. And we don't know necessarily whether Joseph is aware of this or not, of the Lord's influence, but certainly everywhere Joseph goes in Egypt, good things are seeming to happen to him. He's being put in authority. Chapter 40, he gets a chance to interpret two different dreams for people that are members of the Pharaoh's court, the cupbearer and the chief baker. He tells the cupbearer, look, your dream means that you'll be restored. You're going to get out of prison. And when you do, hey, remember me. Remember this Hebrew boy who's rotting in prison, who's innocent, who can interpret dreams. Tell Pharaoh and get me out. And the cupbearer says, no problem. Well, the cupbearer is restored at the end of chapter 40, and he does not remember Joseph. He's probably just thankful that he's out, and he does not remember Joseph. 2 whole years go by, and Joseph is still unjustly rotting in prison. Now, we're soon to find out that he's at this point about 30 years old. So he's been in Egypt 13 years. Most of it has not gone too well. A lie told about him. He's ended up in prison, not going according to certainly any plan that Joseph would have planned for himself when he was young. Staying faithful to God does not really seem to help him in any tangible way, at least as the world would probably judge it. We get to chapter 41, and Pharaoh has a dream. His magicians and his wise men cannot interpret this dream, and suddenly the cupbearer's like, oh yeah, there's this Hebrew boy in prison. He's got a knack for interpreting dreams. Pharaoh says, bring him out. In verse 14, he is brought out. They change his clothes. They shave him. They get him ready to go before Pharaoh. And in verse 15, very interesting here, we have Pharaoh saying to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph's answer is absolutely amazing, because once again, you would understand if Joseph would say, look, here is my chance. I'm going to make myself indispensable. I'm going to take credit. I'm going to say, absolutely right, Pharaoh, you need me. Get me out of prison. I can interpret all your dreams. But that is not what Joseph says. Look at verse 16. Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. And so he interprets the dream, giving God the credit. And again, you're probably familiar with the story. If not, you can certainly go and read the details in chapter 41. But he interprets the dream as follows. You're going to have 7 good years of plenty here in Egypt, where you have a surplus of crops and everything's going good. Then you're going to have 7 years of crop failure, of famine, and things are going to be bad. He also says that because you dreamed this dream twice, that means that this 7 years of plenty is about to start. It's all going to happen soon. We pretty much know what the next 14 years are going to look like. Joseph says at the end of this, you need to pick a discerning and wise man, someone who can be put in charge of storing up this surplus during the 7 good years so we can survive the 7 bad years. Look then at Pharaoh's response in chapter 41, verse 38. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God? You know, that's a pretty cool sentence, especially for a Pharaoh. Can we find somebody who's got the Spirit of God? Now, does somebody who has the Spirit of God, is that pretty tangible? Is that observable to be able to see someone who has the Spirit of God? Can we look around today? Can the world look at us and see the Spirit of God in us? Well, to Pharaoh, it was obvious. Verse 39, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you. Joseph's life is about to change in a massive, massive way. Let's read on here, verse 41. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand and clothed him in garments of fine linen. Put a gold chain about his neck. He made him ride in a second chariot, and they called out before him, bow the knee. Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no one shall lift up hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphanath-Paneah. He gave him in marriage Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. So Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So Joseph's life has completely changed. These people in Egypt are going to see him as their Savior. he has been given the opportunity by God, through interpreting these dreams, to be a celebrity in Egypt. That's the proper name for it. Second in command under Pharaoh. He now speaks Egyptian. He's dressing like an Egyptian. He's got Pharaoh's gold chain around his neck. He's probably clean shaven, as most Egyptians were, in contrast to what the Israelites and the Hebrew people were known as. He's been given an Egyptian wife. He's 30 years old. He's lived basically half his life now, his adult years in Egypt. Finally, it looks as if life is working out a little better for Joseph. Think about his life up until this point. He's lived in two cultures. One culture, his family, sold him into slavery. The other culture that started out with him as a slave has now empowered him, and his star has never been brighter. Everybody's about to learn his name. It'd be very easy, again, to see how someone in that position would want to have nothing to do with their previous life. So Joseph does his job. He stores up the surplus during those 7 years. He has 2 sons with his new Egyptian wife. Then we get to chapter 42. And Joseph's brothers are sent by Jacob, all of them except for Benjamin, are sent by Jacob to go and buy grain from Egypt. Verse 6, they come in, they bow down to him, they don't recognize him. And I love verse 9 here of chapter 42. They've come in, his brothers have bowed down, they don't recognize him. Why would they? He's Egyptian, he looks Egyptian, it's been 20 years since they've seen him. They have no idea what's happened to him. And of course he recognizes them. They just bow down to him, and look at verse 9. And Joseph remembered the dreams that he had dreamed of them. Now these dreams have been 20 years in the past, but he remembered, hey, I had this dream. My brothers were going to bow down to me. They hated me. They sold me into slavery for it. Now look what's happened. Here they are, and they're bowing down to me. It'd be very logical and human of Joseph to think, oh, how the tables have turned. Look at this chance. God's dreams, or whoever was behind it, are coming true. We're going to speed up through the rest of the story here to get to the Hebrews 11 passage at the end of Genesis. But you're probably familiar how Joseph kind of sends them back and forth to Jacob. He accuses them of being spies. They finally bring Benjamin. We jump to chapter 45, and the great reveal of Joseph happens. He reveals himself to his brothers. He says, look, it's me, Joseph. They're dismayed at his presence, as you would be. They're very, very shocked. And then look at verse 5. We kind of get a peek into Joseph's perspective here. Chapter 45, verse 5. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 10 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. Absolutely amazing here. Joseph has had a long time to think about what's happened. And maybe against all odds of what the world would expect, he has kept his long view perspective here. His viewpoint is that he is here to serve a larger purpose. Did he like being sold into slavery? Absolutely not. But he is telling his brothers, look, this was all part of God's plan. I have not been abandoned. Now I've got a chance at not only reunion with my father and my family, but I have the tools to save them and to give them a better life. So Joseph's large family is brought to Goshen, right outside of Egypt. At the end of chapter 46, Jacob and Joseph are reunited. In chapter 47, Pharaoh gives permission for Jacob and his family to actually tend his herds and take care of his livestock. Jacob's family, his extended family, is now being accepted into the culture of Egypt. Joseph continues to make Pharaoh wealthy by selling out the surplus. We get to the end of chapter 49, and Jacob dies. And after Jacob dies, the beginning of chapter 50, the last chapter of Genesis, Joseph commands that Jacob be embalmed in the Egyptian manner. Again, that makes a lot of sense. He is Egyptian. He has him embalmed in the Egyptian manner. The people of Egypt mourn for Joseph's father for 70 days. Again, Joseph is a celebrity. He has been embraced by these people here in Egypt. Pharaoh gives permission for Joseph and his family to go and bury his father in the same cave up in Canaan where Abraham and Isaac are buried. All the elders of the land of Egypt go with them. The servants of the household of Pharaoh go with them. They leave their kids behind. Joseph trusts the Egyptian to take care of his and his brother's children while they are gone. After the burial, some uninteresting thing happens. Joseph's brothers think, okay, here comes the revenge. The other shoe's about to drop. Now, Joseph's been civil up until this point, but now that our father's gone, he's going to get his revenge. And they come and they again bow down before him. Look at verse 19 of chapter 50. Once again, Joseph says, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones." Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Once again, Joseph is maintaining that his perspective, his role in the larger story of God's promise, and he's not giving in to these temptations, these human temptations of getting revenge. Now we've arrived at the very last few verses of Genesis, which is the part that Hebrews 11 chooses to spotlight. Chapter 50, verse 24. "And Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land, to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt." That's the end of Genesis. When Exodus chapter 1 starts, 350 some odd years have gone by, and Joseph's bones are still sitting there embalmed in that coffin. We actually get two more mentions of Joseph's bones in the Old Testament. If you jump to Exodus 13:19, when Moses is finally ready to lead the Israelites out of Egypt after the 10 plagues and everything else, we get in that verse, Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with you from here. So Moses remembers. Imagine 350 years of them having to keep up with the fact of, where's this coffin? Remember when we leave, whenever that is, we've got to take it with us. Some pretty good awareness here by Moses to remember to know we've got to take Joseph, our forefather, his bones with us. Then if you jump all the way to the end of Joshua 24, verse 32, the next to last verse in Joshua, again, as for the bones of Joseph, which the people of Israel brought up from Egypt, they buried them at Shechem, in the piece of land that Jacob bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money. It became an inheritance of the descendants of Joseph. A couple of things interesting about this to me. The first is that the last time we heard about Joseph being in Shechem is when his brothers were selling him into slavery. That's where it happened. It happened in Shechem, and his body was thrown into this pit. And now here we are, 400 plus years later, and Joseph's body is again being lowered into the ground at Shechem, this time being buried. I just find that a little interesting. Another interesting thing here is that because the bones of Joseph are basically closing out the book of Joshua here, it not only closes that out, but it closes out the entire patriarchal history of the Bible. In one way or another, from Joshua going back to the very end of Genesis, these last 5 books of the Bible, you could oversimplify it and say it's all been a story about getting Joseph's bones from Egypt to the Promised Land. And finally, at the end of Joshua, you have God's people who, they are God's people, they've got their own land, they're in a blessed relationship with God, and they stand in large, large numbers. So all of God's promises to the patriarchs, to Abraham, have at least partially come true at this point. Now let's go back to Hebrews chapter 11. I'm going to read the passage one more time. Verse 22, "By faith Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones." I've got 3 takeaways that I believe we can learn from the story of Joseph and his great faith. The first is that Joseph knew where he had come from. We know that Joseph would have been taught about God's dealings with his families at a very young age, all about his great-grandfather Abraham, being told to leave his home. I'm sure he heard stories about his great-uncle Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah, about his grandfather Isaac and Rebekah and his uncle Esau and his father Jacob, and all these promises that God had made to the patriarchs. Joseph was taught, I'm sure, that God was faithful and would be faithful in his promises. That trust in God was put in Joseph by his family, by the way he was raised. At the age of 17, he was thrown into this very difficult position, and yet Joseph did not forget his roots. He kept them in his heart. When Potiphar's wife tries to tempt him, we see that by his response. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Do you remember where you come from this evening? You come from a God who made you in his image. He put an eternal soul inside of you. He put you in a position to breathe, to eat, to sleep, to love, to laugh, to live and enjoy this life for him. He didn't just deposit you aimlessly on this planet as scientists would have you believe. He's got a plan for you. He expects things of me and you because he loves us. He loves us so much that before we were even born, he sent Jesus to die a blameless death for sins that we had not even committed yet. Think about that kind of love. Those are our roots today. That's where we come from. For most of you listening to this, at some point in your life, in your past life, you believed in the Word of God, you came forward with a repentant heart and a confessing mouth and put on Christ in baptism for the remission of your sins. Those are our roots. Now, some of you may share those roots with your parents, with your siblings, with your children, with relatives, with neighbors. Some of you may be the only Christian in your family. You may be one of the only Christians to have ever obeyed the New Testament Word of God. But regardless of how many Christians you have around you, your roots were planted when you were baptized. Think about your spiritual journey since your baptism. Think about, maybe it was a year ago. Maybe it was 40 years ago. Think back 2 years, 5 years ago, 20 and 30 years ago. As you reflect on your spiritual walk, is it a walk of Christian and spiritual growth and maturity? Or do you look back in the past and think, a year and a half ago, I was a better Christian than I am today? Do you look to yesterday with a fondness for a time when sin did not control your life as much, when you had more spiritual peace, when you were walking in the light, when life was less complicated? Or maybe do you look back and think, man, I made a lot of mistakes back then, but now I have matured and I've gotten better? As we continue that reflection, let's look at my second takeaway. Not only did Joseph remember where he had come from, but Joseph knew where he was going. Hebrews 11 talks about a lot of patriarchs, and kind of the whole point that the chapter sets up is that by faith they did things, even though to them the tangible effects of these promises were not going to happen in their lifetime. It was not always easy to see for the patriarchs where they were going. Joseph's life certainly did not go the way he was planned. No one plans on being sold into slavery, rotting in prison unjustly, being abandoned by your family, thrown into a new culture. But Joseph maintained his vision of where he was going. He saw God in times when many would have had trouble doing so. As we mentioned before, it would have been really easy for Joseph to see a very positive future in Egypt for his people. He's number 2 in this entire wealthy kingdom. How easy would it have been for him to forget God or maybe get wrapped up in his own self-importance, and instead of saving his entire large family, him to view that as, what, guys, we're going to make a brand new future in Egypt for God's people. When I die, instead of saying, we're going to leave and take my bones with you, he could have said, build me a pyramid, build me a tomb worthy of the name of Joseph, of Zaphanath-Paneah, worthy of my deeds. We're going to create a new legacy here. But he didn't do that. When he was staring death in the face, he remembered where he was going. As good as Egypt was, he knew it wasn't the promised land. He was a part of the story, but he was not the end-all be-all. God's people had not made it to the nation and to the land that God had promised them. This wasn't it. This looks good, guys, but this is not it. Don't get too comfortable. This is not home. We'll be leaving, and when we do, take my bones with you. I don't want to stay here. Joseph was destination-oriented in everything he did. Where are you headed today? Where are you going in this life? We love to sing a song that says, this world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. Is that evident to others living around you? That when they see you, they see someone who is a visitor, who has not put down roots in this temporary carnal world? When God made us, he gave us this physical body that's going to die, but he also gave us an immortal soul. And that soul, every single soul ever created, is going to end up in heaven or hell. And regardless of where your soul is headed today, This morning when you woke up, you were one day closer to that final destination. It should be evident and obvious to those around us that we don't belong here in this world. We're called to be a light on the hill. Are we living in such a way that that light is shining, that people can look at us and say, that person's different? Are we preparing for our final destination? You know, when Pharaoh was looking for a man to implement his plan, he said, is there somebody around here that has the Spirit of God? And they found that in Joseph. It was obvious and discernible. God was with this man. It's so easy for us to take our eyes off the final destination of heaven, even though God has laid it all out for us with Jesus as the ticket. You know, sometimes when we make mistakes, if we reflect, we might see that the mistake didn't necessarily start right when we made it, but it started 3 months ago or 2 years ago when we made this decision or that. And that decision, while innocent at the time, led us down a path, off the path that leads to heaven, and led us down a path to where, you know, we intended for this to be a little rest stop, a little detour, but in fact, that path led to another turn, and then the mistake was made. Where are you going this evening? Are you living like you're going to heaven? Or are you living as if you've put down too many roots here in this world? This leads me to my final lesson that we can learn from Joseph and his faith. Point number 3, he knew where he had come from. He knew where he was going, and he did not let any worldly circumstance change that. You know, we've just looked at a whole bunch of different times where Joseph could have been distracted, where he could have been forced or pushed voluntarily off the path. When Joseph was sold into slavery, when he was tempted by Potiphar's wife, when he was thrown into prison, when he was forgotten by the cupbearer, when he spent the prime of his life in prison, given powers to interpret dreams and gave God the credit, did not punish his brothers for what they had done, didn't abandon his spiritual heritage. Joseph stayed unshakable toward God. The devil has so many ways to distract us. What do you spend your time doing? What do you spend your thoughts on? What is your mindset? Does it show your roots? Does it show your intended, hoped-for final destination? Or does it show something else? Is your life lived on purpose? As if you're a plane in the sky and the runway is heaven and you've got your eyes laser focused on it, fully in target? Are you teaching your kids that? If your kids were asked, what do your parents really care about? What would they say? What would be observable to them? The devil's final destination is already decided. There's nothing he can do to change it. He has all the time in the world, but our souls do not. You know, and Satan, you've heard this before probably, but Satan has most of the world already. It's easy to get them, but he has to be trickier with faithful Christians. He probably wouldn't take someone who's walking in the light as a faithful Christian and throw a Potiphar's wife kind of obvious temptation straight at them. He's going to distract us. If he could just get us to pause along the path, to look at something else, to take a short detour. These decisions may be small, they may seem of little or no consequence, but if he can do that, he might make it easier for the next distraction, the next temptation to ensnare us a little bit further. And before you know it, you're no longer walking in the light. I want to close this evening with a story about a man named Dustin. Dustin was 43 years old the day that he woke up in a hospital. Dustin could not remember why or what had happened. As he came to, he was told the awful truth. Dustin, you've been in a car accident. Your car was found in a neighborhood that was nowhere near your house. We looked at your levels in your body, and we discovered that it was full of illicit substances that obviously affected your driving. And unfortunately, there was an accident. You struck a family that was riding their bikes down this neighborhood. The adults are going to be okay, but the little 7-year-old girl, her life is in jeopardy. We're not sure if she's going to make it. And also, Dustin, you've got a long road of recovery ahead of you. Now, Dustin laid there at 43 years old, day after day, thinking about what had happened. And he received no visitors. Dustin had friends, he had family, he had a lot of acquaintances who had known him since he was very, very little. But none of them showed up. You see, when most of the people found out about what had happened to Dustin, they were shocked. Most of the world thought that Dustin was an upstanding, successful Christian man Many had known Dustin when he was younger, and he had conducted Bible studies, and he had won awards at Christian summer camps, and he had went to a Christian college, and he had gotten a great job and started a beautiful family. To the world, to most of the people who saw Dustin, this is what he was. But those that were closest to Dustin knew the truth. Dustin had not been those things for a very long time. His wife was getting ready to leave him. His kids, who were upper teens and early 20s, resented him. His parents prayed and prayed for him each and every day, but when acquaintances would come and ask them, "How's your son doing?" they would quickly change the subject out of embarrassment. Dustin got no visitors, and so as he laid there day after day, he reflected on his life and how it had all went wrong. He thought about how at the age of 24, early in his marriage, he had gotten his wife a nice new car that the family could barely afford. He really enjoyed the attention of the neighbors and his wife for this new car, for seeing him as such a great husband. This was soon followed by a nicer and bigger house. Now, a car, a house, there's nothing wrong with either one of those things. But as Dustin thought back, he realized that for him, what he had really been buying was the pride. He was starting to get addicted to that pride. And he justified this, he remembered, by saying, "I'm just being a good husband. I'm buying my wife nice things. She really likes them," and she did. But really, he enjoyed the attention a little too much. He told himself, "This is what I've been waiting for. When all those Bible class teachers told me to wait for a good Christian marriage, this is what they meant. My life is taking off. It's going to be great. It's going to be wonderful." He failed to see that he and his wife both were becoming just a little bit too materialistic and in love with this world. He thought about how at the age of 30, that now he and his wife had 2 young children, that life had gotten a little more stressful, a little more exhausting. He thought about how he had started coming up with excuses to stay at work a little bit longer. The extra work relieved him of the stressful environment from his home, and it meant more money to go on bigger vacations and have nicer things. His preacher and his father both came to Dustin at this point and reminded him, "Look, these young years when your children are so young are very important. You need to be there for them. A godly father leads by example, and you need to be there." But Dustin basically ignored that advice. After all, he was working by the sweat of his brow to provide. Wasn't that what he was supposed to be doing? Wasn't his job to be a good husband and a good father? He only intended to work this overtime for 6 more months, and they'd have this newest car paid off, and everything would be fine. And then he'd go back and he'd spend time with his family then. 5 months into that 6 months, he was given a promotion. He saw his new salary, he saw his new office, he saw the prestige that went with his new job, and he saw his new attractive secretary, and Dustin decided, "I'm going to take this promotion." Now, his wife wasn't so sure, but he justified it. "Look, honey, if we make more money, we can give more money on Sunday. We can write a bigger check to God and to the church. It'll be fine. Think about the kids' college fund." And so he took the promotion. Dustin laid there and thought about how when he was 37, his new boss had showed up. This boss loved to throw lunches just for a select few of the workplace. And at the lunches is where the inside jokes were made, and the dirty stories were told, and the after-work plans were conceived, and the immoral, secular lifestyle was praised. His kids were growing up, and when Dustin came home stressed out by his new boss's high expectations and feeling guilty about his regrets and how his life was going, he had no time for his kids. He compared everything his wife said to him to what his female coworkers at work said to him. He thought they respected him way more than this ungrateful woman did at home. At the age of 40, Dustin's boss told a long, drawn-out, funny story, as he liked to do. And after the story, he did something that shook Dustin to the core. He looked right at Dustin and said, "You know, the people in those stories, they don't understand. They're not like us. You and I, Dustin, we are just the same. Give it 10 years, you'll probably be in my shoes, in my office, doing my job, making what I make." Now, on the inside, Dustin was screaming, "We are not the same. I've got nothing in common with you." But he did want at least part of what his boss said to be true. He'd love to make that money and have that job. That night when he got home, he told his wife what had happened and what his boss had said about him. And after hearing the story, his wife looked him dead in the eye and said, "He's right. You and him are the same." Dustin could not believe she had said that. He told her that he'd be out late the next night for a business meeting. In actuality, it was a party that his boss had invited him to, and he wasn't planning on going. But now that this disrespectful woman had said that, Dustin thought he would go. He didn't really want to come home. The next night at the party, Dustin tasted his first ever alcoholic drink. And something strange happened. Despite being told all his young life about the ills and fears of alcohol, nothing bad happened. In fact, it was kind of fun. Every joke was funnier, every girl was prettier, every story was more interesting. These late night evenings continued, and they became more of a habit for Dustin. When he came home smelling of alcohol, he had all of his excuses planned and ready. I know my limits, honey. I'm not actually drunk. It just comes with the job. You don't understand. Relax, calm down. I'm doing this for you and the kids. At age 42, Dustin's marriage was barely a marriage. His kids resented him. A promotion that he thought was going to happen had not happened, and alcohol barely drowned his sorrow anymore. He got a new secretary who invited him to a party. Since lots of other people were going to be there, he thought it'd be okay if he went with her, so he did. After all, this was the only place where anyone seemed to respect him and like him. He deserved this. And even though nothing happened between he and the woman, he lied to his wife about where he had been because she knew she would not approve. After continued lies to his wife, Dustin felt guilty. Because of his alcohol addiction, instead of realizing that only telling the truth would remove his guilt, he sought another means of escape from the guilt. You see, his new secretary had a friend who started bringing all manner of drugs to these parties, promising all sorts of escapes and highs. Dustin felt terrible about his life, except for when he was with these people and doing these things, so he kept at it. And then at age 43, one night, Dustin got so drunk that he could not drive home, and his secretary said she would drive him home. But instead of driving to his house, she drove to her house. There, he cheated on his wife. He felt terrible about this, just long enough to take the most drugs he had ever taken. Anything to escape the pain of his broken life. After this, he had gotten in a car completely unfit to drive in a neighborhood he did not recognize and crashed into the family that was out on the bike ride. Dustin lay there in the hospital, aware of so many wrong turns in his life. Turns that were supposed to be inconsequential. Turns that he had seen other people do and come away completely unscathed. Paths that weren't necessarily even wrong sometimes by their own accord. Advice that had been ignored. Red flags that he quickly minimized and justified. He was a master at justifying his sin. He had been blind in so many of these turns in life, unwilling or unable to see the truth. He thought about that 17-year-old Christian he had been, full of so much Christian zeal for God, so sure about what his life would entail. He resolved right then to change. He knew it was going to be hard. His wife might still leave him. His kids might not want to talk. His job, well, he might be headed to prison. He wasn't sure. Progress might be slow, but he thought about his favorite Bible verses, things he had not thought about in a long, long time. He thought about 2 Peter 3:9 that says, "The Lord is not slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient towards you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance." God hadn't given up on him. God would receive him back if he was truly repentant. And he was. No one else might believe it, but he would show them. He thought of James 4:8 that says, "Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded." That is exactly what Dustin planned to do, and that's what he did. Now, Dustin had a challenging life. Most of the rest of his days were a struggle. In the world's eyes, at the age of 43, Dustin's life went way, way downhill. But he felt peace when his head hit the pillow. He was grateful for his second chances. He told his story and kept others from making the same mistakes. He convinced young people that you do not have to sow wild oats in order to gain the wisdom that it took me so long to gain. The wisdom is right there in front of you. It's in your Bible. It's right there in the Christian examples at church, your parents, your youth minister, etc. And Dustin's life no longer resembled the world's. As we think about Joseph this evening, how easy would it have been for Joseph to have been distracted like Dustin, to take a wrong turn and another wrong turn and end up in a completely different place and forget his roots. But by faith, Joseph didn't do that. He kept his eyes on the prize. He wanted to be buried in the promised land. Most of you watching have been buried in Christ. Are your roots still there? Have they gotten stronger over time? Do you know where you are going? Is your mindset focused on that destination? Can others around you tell? Have you gotten distracted? As you think about your life and the decisions you've made, has something that was only ever intended to be a short, temporary detour become an entirely new lifestyle like Dustin? Let us stay focused on what we are here to do, where we have come from, and where we are going. I hope this lesson has been a blessing to you this evening. Thank you so much for watching.